From CSDC, the Charter Schools Development Center.
You don't want to be surprised at the mid-year assessment that the progress has been slower than expected when the growth opportunity was so high for a kid who may test 3 grade levels behind at the beginning of the year assessment. So I find it very important that formative data needs to be collected on a weekly basis.
Welcome to Boarding Pass, your ticket to effective charter school governance. I'm Catlin O'Halloran and Hellar, and more than 20 years ago, I got the bright idea that I was going to start a charter school. My son was in preschool, and I wanted to create a free Montessori charter school and a public education option in my small rural community. I actually said the words, I mean, how hard can it really be? And 2 decades later, I know exactly how hard it is to build and maintain a high quality charter school in California. So I'm going to take you down the path I went down and help you learn everything you need to know to excel as a board member in a thriving charter school. Today, I'd like to welcome Vanessa Garza. Vanessa is the executive director of the Girls Athletic Leadership School in Los Angeles. In her role as school leader, Vanessa expertly translates student potential into success of self and beyond. With her data driven leadership, teachers evaluate their classroom instruction to ensure student mastery with a holistic approach. She also serves as a charter school board member at James Jordan Middle School. And when she's not crunching numbers or reviewing data, Vanessa enjoys naps, true crime podcasts, and the outdoors. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk with her today. Welcome to Boarding Pass, Vanessa.
Thank you for having me here.
So glad you're with us today. So tell me, how did you first get into the work of charter schools?
I was at an ALUSD BITSA conference and I met a teacher from Synergy Academy. And the teacher was explaining how the school founders do PE every morning with the whole school. And that environment sounded so amazing. So I just dived into the charter school landscape in Los Angeles, never looked back, and I'm so proud to be a part of the charter school movement.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. I love how those moments sort of happen where, like, you go to the conference looking for something else and you find a new career, right? That's great. So we're talking today on this particular episode about monitoring student achievement data. So what's the purpose of collecting that data?
In terms of the purpose of collecting student achievement data, right off the bat, it's progress monitoring, particularly when you're serving some more vulnerable student groups, such as emerging bilinguals, English language learners, students with IEPs, and other diverse learners. You want to make sure that they are achieving their individual goals, the goals that the state has set out for the grade level, and that they're making adequate progress throughout the year.
And so, do you collect then just that academic data, or are there other sorts of data you collect to inform student learning?
Absolutely. Other forms of data that we collect are more in the social emotional experience, whether for us it could be the district school experience survey, or there is the Healthy Kids survey administered by the state or available from the state. And that is just equally as important because that's talking about the quality of life that a student is having at your school and helping you identify other gaps that can be impacting the academic outcomes or the attendance rates at your school that you as a leader and your team can address.
Sure, I bet that's really useful in terms of trying to put together, and educate the whole child, right? The Montessori education is about the whole child, and I know you guys sort of feel the same way, obviously, wanting to make sure that you're addressing the things that are going on at home and in the community as well as in the classroom.
Exactly.
And so, as a board member, I think data for me, data is one of those things that maybe makes me a little nervous. I'm not really sure what I'm looking for, what I'm supposed to find, and I know there's lots of different kinds of assessments performed for schools, in particular in that academic realm. Can you give me sort of a brief description about formative, cumulative, and summative data and what the differences are?
Yes, so that is a lesson in itself for most board members. Just like school finance, public finance is different than just having a general understanding of that world. So when it comes to different types of academic data, um, you would probably want to start with the formative data because you want to see how those diagnostics at the beginning are laying the landscape for what kids are going to need throughout the school year. And then you progress monitor that and have that benchmark data, which is cumulative data.
Hmm.
What happened from the first 6 weeks of school during a beginning of year assessment to about December, January, your mid year assessment. And then ultimately, that summative data comes in the form for all of us public schools in terms of the CAS data, and as well as if you're using a platform like iReady, where you would have already captured the diagnostics, you could even capture the formative if you have the kids working on the skills throughout the year that were identified on the initial diagnostic, you will have a summative data as well to evaluate and actually prepare you for what to expect for the state test
Hmm.
because it is, in that case, with that vendor, verified data for California.
And so when you're collecting all this data along the way and you're sort of ramping up to the big finale, you're also tweaking your instruction, right? And you're doing things that you hope will improve that data both in the short term and then for those sort of bigger outcomes.
Exactly. You have to make those investments and you have to, as the school leader and the board member who's right, their charge is the governance, the fiscal responsibility that a school has to make the right investments. What are the interventions that are being done, or what are the learning pathways that kids are going to need, particularly from those subgroups that I mentioned before?
Mhm. Uh-huh.
And more specifically, every school has a different set of what's called statistically significant subgroups.
Okay.
So, as a board, you'd want to pay attention. Well, if the school is going to be held accountable for emerging bilinguals, what are the growth opportunities that those students have, and how is it going? And is what we chose as our support, as our curriculum working?
Hmm. And that's an important place for board members to intersect also, because if you, as the school leader, come to me as a board member and say, hey, this isn't working for our subgroups, we need you to find some money in the budget to buy this other curriculum, right? And so as a board member, I'm like, well, show me why I'm going to divert this money or to, take it out of our, excess funds or move it from something else in order to do this. And this data, it sounds like, is really helpful for making those decisions too.
It is like we talk about data driven decisions in public schools all the time, but it doesn't just live exclusively in the world or on the academic side of the house. There's definitely overlap with the financials. And I think that sometimes is missed because often the academics, the outcomes, the data is presented perhaps by the instructional leader of the school.
Well, what?
And then the board may see that as a split because the financial data may be coming from a back office provider, the executive director, but the conversation absolutely overlaps.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's yeah, you're right. And when you're getting those numbers from some with the financial numbers from somewhere else and you're getting the data numbers from the school leader, as a board member, you're looking at all this and you're like, okay, I got to make a right decision here. And how do I do that? And yeah, I think that's really important. Now, how often do you collect data? Is this something that happens in classrooms every day or every week or 6 times a year? How often does that happen?
You definitely have to be mindful when you're considering how often are we going to collect the data, but also what is going to be collected with what frequency. So it is best to collect it at least on a weekly basis. You may monitor like homework completion, and hopefully you're using a platform that's providing the students the opportunity to practice skills at their level
Hmm.
as far as like where you're expecting students to spend their time with homework. If you check on that once a week, you know who's falling behind on getting passage rates for the lessons that they're assigned.
Hmm.
That has implications then to what we discuss about cumulative data. You don't want to be surprised at the mid-year assessment that the
Right.
progress has been slower than expected when the growth opportunity was so high
Hmm.
for a kid who may test 3 grade levels behind
Hmm.
at the beginning of the year assessment. So I find it very important that formative data needs to be collected on a weekly basis. But it's got to be the source that you're collecting has to be sound so that we don't have garbage in and garbage out. It's meaningful. It's easy for the teachers who are the ones that need to turn around and make those curricular adjustments or find the resources necessary to support a particular group of students.
It sounds like the data really makes the learning sort of dynamic, right? I mean, you're every day you're sort of adjusting, every week you're sort of adjusting to what does this subgroup look like? What is, what do these outcomes look like? How much time do we have left to teach this? What resources do we have? And so it's sort of a moving target. It feels like a little.
It is a moving target, and it's important to remember that the kids will grow, right, at different rates, but then also between those weekly collections of data and before you reach the cumulative the cumulative testing, what could be done to even intensify that support? So we were referencing, how does a board decide we do need to invest
Mhm.
5,000 over here, and we didn't have that spelled out at the beginning? You can say, "Look at the support we've been providing for everyone, but there's a group of students that are more vulnerable,
Mhm.
and we're needing to do catch-up club once a week after school. We need to pay a certificated teacher and their time, and this is what it's gonna take. We have to make this attempt to give them, what they need to have better results at their mid-year assessment."
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you guys have a pretty small staff, right? I mean, you've got a pretty small staff, and what's the staff bandwidth like, and how do you make this all work?
Exactly. I do wanna call out that thank you for highlighting. The entire staff is only 20 at our school, and we serve less than 200 students.
That's
We
a lot of work. You guys, yeah, hard work.
It is. So, we say we have an intervention coordinator, the intervention coordinator is also the SPED director, the special education director, but that goes hand in hand because that's an individual whose students that she is most closely serving often fall into the category that I was just discussing, that they may not be making the progress that their
Mhm.
peers, their grade level peers are making. So then that makes sense. So instead
Mhm.
of like extending the bandwidth of a staff by just taking like, hey, who wants to volunteer for this? Have like a coaching conversation with a potential rising instructional leader at your school to give them that opportunity. And we do that also with in other ways, like our ELL coordinator is a full-time classroom teacher.
Mhm.
Is it a full-time classroom teacher of a tested subject like science or math and English? No. We have a life skills class, which is a core elective at gals. It's a non-tested subject.
Mhm.
So it's about that. Like think about the load that a staff person's already carrying, but you also want to keep them hungry for their growth opportunities,
Right.
and then how you can balance those needs with what you're trying to address at school.
And I like the way that you sort of highlight the rising leaders because I think especially when we see succession planning, as again, Dorian putting my board hat on, right? And we're like, oh no, this person is going to take a new opportunity somewhere. Who do we have queued up? And that doesn't happen overnight. That happens by really being thoughtful about people's interests and their talents and cultivating all of that in your rising leaders.
I appreciate that too. I think often the board, when they think about succession planning, it's about just the executive director or the principal.
Right.
But the effectiveness of an executive director or principal is made possible by who's on the bench for the teacher leadership positions, for the intervention coordinator, for your special education director. And so I do want to call that out that the board also should ask those kinds of questions or explore that too.
Yeah, and I think especially in a small school like yours, your best talent are the people that are already with you because they're invested and they love your students and they love your community and so to be able to move those folks through the system and increase their responsibility along the way is really good for your school and your school community.
Especially for a small school.
Yeah, for sure. And because you're a small school, do you automate your data collection? Is that something that you do, or is there another way that how do you said that you have people who have other full time jobs doing this already. How do you manage that?
Right. It depends on the data we're collecting. So behavior data, correct? Like the potential to uh, store that or be able to generate reports on that does exist in our student information system, Aries. But in terms of what does a teacher need or what does a grade level need to figure out if additional support's needed, behavior data is best actually for us in a homemade Google spreadsheet
Hmm.
that we kind
Hmm.
of just keep and it acts as a log to reflect and see patterns. And then when it comes to academic data, I was mentioning the platform iReady.
Yes.
That is fantastic because the user interface is teacher centered, it's actionable for the teacher, it's also available in multiple ways of explaining the data. So for a board presentation, there's graphs and charts that make more sense to apply. And you want to have automaticity where you don't want to be having to learn VLOOKUP or amazing Excel formulas and be an
Right.
expert in that. That's not the best use of a school leader's time.
Right.
So those kind of investments may feel expensive upfront, particularly, but you may not need to have a data lead
Right.
on your staff if you're automating.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so as you say, you're talking about iReady and having these uh, slides and things that are, you can present graphs, things like that. So as a school director, when you present this student assessment data to your board, what does that look like? What do you share? What do you present? Is it, once a month? Is it twice a year? How often do you do that?
Absolutely. There's always an academic report on a monthly basis. And so you may take whatever platform you're using. Maybe it's Achieve 3000 by McGraw Hill. There is a leadership dashboard that shows you the percentage of students making progress toward their expected growth rate for the year. And you can show like growth over time. So let's look at and compare last month's numbers to this month's numbers. Chronic absenteeism data is
Mm,
significant. It's kind of an elephant in the room.
sure.
If you want to tell the story about maybe why this subgroup isn't making adequate progress or the same progress that their grade level peers are making, you've got to take a look at the slice in chronic absenteeism and who are the students that make up that slice that are missing 90 that are not attending school above 90% of the school year.
Mhm.
And that then helps a board to learn kind of the whole story and get to some of the why and get the full context from the beginning. So I'll pull a screenshot from my Aries analytics dashboard for chronic absenteeism. I'll take a screenshot from Achieve 3000 and Achieve and just make separate slides and kind of build a small but quick narrative for
Mhm.
the board.
Mhm. No, that's great. Yeah, I think all that information is useful. And going back to what you said about the different kinds of data that you're collecting. So when you collect that sort of softer non-academic data, you're actually filling in some of those pieces around why are we seeing these absences? What else is going on at home and in the community, and how can we as a school community help to encourage kids coming to school more often?
And board members also have a huge responsibility when they have to be in a closed session and making decisions about suspension cases.
You bet. Yep.
And that's tough. It doesn't happen often. And so you don't have like experience, right? As a board member to be like, well, okay, here's what I'm receiving in terms of a packet or the narrative. If I have my behavior tracker and I include that, I can demonstrate all the interventions and opportunities and supports that were provided. And yet we have reached this unfortunate decision and need to talk about putting in, I forget the full term, like stipulated suspended expulsion, for example. It's like a very tough behavior contract on some students to give them guidance and opportunity and support
Mhm.
um, to prevent the ultimate, right? The board would feel more confidence with their vote because they're given data that goes beyond the incident that is named in the expulsion report or stipulated expulsion.
Mhm. And you're totally right about that. As a board member, the very few small handful, both I was on a traditional board and on a charter school board, so this is more on the traditional board side. But the small handful of those conversations that I was in on over the years I was on that board, they can be heartbreaking. And you know that the outcome for these students is, it's sort of going to be catastrophic one way or another. But you also need to think about the other students in the school, and so if you're suspending or it's an expulsion hearing or having that data, having that information is so valuable because you're only going on what you know in that hearing at that time. And you're making life-changing decisions for students, and that can be really hard.
I agree.
So you're also a charter school board member. So you wear the same hat that a lot of our listeners wear. And so when you're a board member, then, and you're not the executive director, you're not presenting the data, you're receiving the data. What sorts of questions do you ask? What would you recommend people, other board members, ask when the school's lead administrator presents that data? What are we looking for?
Right. I love this question because in listening to a previous episode about making sure your board has financial expertise or whatever season your school is in, perhaps facilities, there's a discussion coming up. So you want a facilities expert or land use attorney on
Right.
your board. And often because it's already a school board, people don't think to have school leaders, right? Other school leaders on the board, and they may or may not. So if you're not familiar with the inner workings of school data, you want to learn some of the basic questions. And I always start with right from the jump, how many kids actually took the diagnostics? If there's 100 kids in sixth grade and you only got 75 results, that should be a red flag
Yeah.
because that speaks to the culture. Perhaps it wasn't executed in a timely manner, or there was absences and the kids didn't get a chance to complete their assessment. So that's one of the first look fors as a board member to make sure at least 96% of the school completed those assessments that are being shared with you. Second, I would say you want to ask about the subgroups. So often schools, it's easy to share whole school data, easy to share grade level data, but ask about which of the subgroups at our school are considered statistically significant.
Okay.
And can you show me how are the free reduced lunch students doing? How are the Hispanic students doing? Depending on what the school is. I even think like I'm not sure if I could tell you off the top of my head, even for the school for which I serve, what are the statistically significant subgroups? I know how to look it up though, being a school leader, but not all the board members, have that capacity. So there's always this like mini lesson opportunity, I feel, whenever you share data with your board to help them understand what they're looking at best so that they can feel comfortable asking questions.
Right. And I love that sort of, like you said, mini lesson built in there because I think, a lot of what we know about board members is not all of them are school leaders at other schools, right? And so a lot of them are parents or grandparents or, members of the community who just want to support this mission and this effort and who don't maybe have a background in, student assessment data. I certainly did not have a background in student assessment data before I served on boards and on school boards and charter school boards. And now that I do, I still find it really complicated. But like you said, building in a mini lesson and said, saying this is what we're looking for, this is who we're looking at, this is why we're looking at them. And I think that's just so helpful to board members to be able to, again, make informed decisions. Why am I seeing this subgroup data? What does that mean? And what does that mean for funding? And what does that mean for, curriculum and teachers and all of those sorts of things? So I think that's great. I'm glad that you do such a comprehensive presentation, and I hope others will do that as well. I think that's great. So, okay, I'm going to ask you a final question, just kind of wrapping up here. So, again, you're as a board member, as a school leader, what words of wisdom or words of encouragement would you offer new and even veteran charter school board members as they take on this really monumental and important role?
Yes, I love how you said that everyone's literally there at the table to support the mission of the school. And sometimes I feel like there might be the rubber stamp, yay, as the motions are going through. And there might be some hesitance to ask questions, to probe. It might seem like maybe you have concerns, and that's not the case at all.
Right.
I love to encourage board members to feel very comfortable to ask those questions, to come to the table as a learner and engage in that way. Because if you're wondering something, I bet you there's another person on the board that is too.
Almost certainly.
But
Right. Yep.
yeah, so it's all for the transparency and the fidelity of what a board of directors is entrusted to do anyhow. So my big thing is to make sure that board members feel comfortable asking questions regularly about their items. I know we all get board packets,
Yes.
but sometimes it's hard to really go through all of that in a timely manner and in depth. And it's completely appropriate to then come to the table at the meeting and raise the questions because that's when it matters. And you're going to learn so much by making sure you give yourself that opportunity to ask.
Yeah, and I love what you said about coming to the table as a learner. I think that's something I'm taking away from our conversation now is what a great way as a board member to approach your work is that, you are a learner in this. And, not only does no one expect you to learn or to know it before you get there, we're hoping you're going to learn more about it as you are there and as you're asking those questions. So that's fantastic. Great. Thank you. This has been Boarding Pass from CSTC, the Charter Schools Development Center. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And share this podcast with your charter school board member friends. And don't worry if you didn't get it all, we took notes for you. View today's show notes and take a peek at additional resources we've created for you. Just go to chartercenter.org/boardingpass. Thanks as always to Greg Hall, Mike Watson, Melissa Cabral, and today's guest, Vanessa Garza. We'll see you next time on Boarding Pass.
Now that you've got your boarding pass to effective charter school governance, why not upgrade to first class? By becoming a member of the Charter Schools Development Center, you'll gain year-round access to expert guidance, cutting-edge resources, and a network of experienced charter advisors. CSDC membership is your fast track to excellence in charter school governance, offering personalized support and professional development opportunities that will help you and your school soar to new heights. Go to chartercenter.org/membership to learn more.